Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with how to listen to great music. This is like the 8th or 9th talk. We're at the finale, the 4th movement of the Brahms G major sextet, opus 36, in this lovely recording with the Stuttgart soloists on Naxos. And yes, finally the last movement, the 4th movement, which is marked poco allegro, which means a little bit quick. Actually, that has nothing to do with how much energy the piece actually has, because the energy in this movement is really kind of volcanic. It's remarkable just how exciting it is, even though the actual tempo isn't so fast. But you're going to understand why that's true in a moment. Now, the finale of this sextet is, well, like the whole sextet, is just extraordinary. But it addresses some really significant issues that you're going to run into in your adventures through the world of classical music. Many times you may hear talk of something called the finale problem. And the finale problem is very real because, let me see if I can summarize it in a way that makes sense. During the classical period, if you had a symphony or large multi-movement work, a quartet or a trio or a sonata, generally speaking, the most complicated and largest movement is the first. You always hear that in concertos, for example, in the classical period, where you have like Beethoven's, let's take his violin concerto. It has like a 25-minute long first movement, and the other two are like 10 each. You know, the first movement can be so big, it's longer than everything else combined. That's not usually so much the case with symphonies because, first of all, they often have more than 3 movements. You get 4, so there's more movements. And you don't have to worry about integrating a soloist into the ongoing dialogue, which is the business of the first movement. But irrespective of that, the finale is usually the lightest and zippiest movement in a classical sonata scheme. Sonata meaning the general work, not just the first movement form, which we've discussed quite extensively in the first of these talks on the Brahms sextet and elsewhere. I mean, I've done a whole video on sonata form that you can look at. So the finale has a job to do. The job is to wrap up the whole piece, but also to do it in a way that's effective and satisfying and easier on the ear in a classical period piece. Now, during the Romantic era, that changed. And the work that sort of changed it was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, because it moves from tragedy to triumph. And this triumphant victory is expressed in a finale of tremendous heroism and energy and eruptive force. And let me put this down. Okay, there we go. And as a result, the Romantic era, which was all full of, storm and stress and heroics and subjective emotion and, that kind of stuff, was obsessed with this idea of, the tragedy to triumph progression, the dark, tumultuous beginning, leading through a sequence of other moods and atmospheric moments to a total resolution in glorious victory. Well, not everything can do that. First of all, it should be obvious. If everything did that, we would be bored out of our minds. Everything would follow the same pattern. Second of all, not every piece of music can begin miserably. I mean, life is not a tragedy. Not everything starts tragically. And thirdly, how do you achieve a finale that's weightier and bigger and more grandiose than your opening movement? And this is a problem that composers wrestled with throughout the Romantic period. And of course, the greatest ones managed to solve it rather successfully. And nobody solved it more successfully than Brahms did. Brahms was essentially a classicist. Most of his finales follow the traditional classical pattern, where the first movement is the biggest and most complex, and the finale is the least complex, the easiest on the ear, and the most relaxing and just purely enjoyable and intellectually less abstruse. And that's true of this sextet. That's exactly what this sextet does. However, the finale also has to be the logical culmination of the entire work. And in order to make it the logical culmination of the entire work, there are several strategies that you can employ. One of them is to quote themes from earlier in the piece, which was, sort of the easy ticket out. This is what happens in the Franck Symphony in D minor, for example, what they call cyclical form. And lots of composers did it before Franck did. I mean, Dvorak did it, Brahms did it, his own Third Symphony. We hear this kind of, repeat of earlier themes quite frequently as a way to unify a work, especially when the last part of the work is in a much looser and more relaxed form than the first part. That gives you that feeling of unity without having to, express it in terms of some sort of very carefully worked out struggle, striving, kind of overreaching program, goal-directed thing, if you know what I mean. It's just easy. It makes sense immediately. You recognize, you go, aha, I heard that before, therefore they all belong together. So Brahms sometimes does that, but even more importantly, and then as a unifying factor, there are other ways to recall earlier movements or to show that the finale is adequate, that it really does summarize all of the things we've heard before while still being itself. Now, we've talked about this concept quite frequently in our Haydn Symphony Crusade, a series of videos on all the Haydn symphonies, because Haydn was the guy who first worked out how to do that, how to create a finale that belongs entirely to the work in question and is still light and frothy and fun to listen to, but doesn't necessarily quote anything that we've heard before, literally. And that was something that Brahms learned very, very intently, studied it, he learned it, and he embodied it in many of his works, and in this sextet particularly. So what I want to do, first of all, so the way we're going to approach this is we're going to, first of all, talk about the structure of this finale, and then we're going to talk about how it acts as a perfect summary of the entire work, a beautiful summary of the entire work, and then we're going to run the whole finale as the finale of this series of talks. And I think hopefully by the time we're done, you'll really, really be plugged in to how this is going to go. And then, of course, since we've done these as separate talks and they're sometimes fairly long, you really should just listen to the whole piece all the way through, and whatever performance you happen to have or have access to. And keep in mind all of the things that we've talked about along the way. And then we'll continue this series with another work, and we'll just keep going forever and have a great time analyzing these amazing pieces of music. So, the finale of this sextet is in sonata form, like the first movement, meaning it has two principal subjects, and as with all true movements in sonata form, not the textbook definition, a subject can be anything. It can have one idea, it can have 10 ideas. What matters is what tonal area the subject takes place in, what location it occupies. So the first subject is actually two parts. It has two ideas. And Brahms, genius that he is, actually does something wonderful. Because in my talks on sonata form, I said that the material of a sonata movement usually consists of two types. There are the subjects, the first and the second subject. And then there is motion music that moves you from one to the other, that affects the modulation, the change in location or tonality between those subjects. Well, Brahms begins with the motion music. He begins with the music of movement. And the first subject is 50% motion and 50% tune. And the tune is gorgeous. Oh, it's so beautiful. It goes... I just love this tune. Most of the themes in this particular sextet are thrilling in one way or another, but it's so beautiful, and it has this wonderful rhythmic energy below it. It's going bum, 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 like this underneath. It's just gorgeous. But it begins with this buzzing and whirring and chugga, 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 with all the strings. It's all this movement, this furious energy. And that is why Brahms marks it poco allegro, a little bit quick, because the opening motion music is written in very short note values. Chugga, 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 like that. So even though the tempo isn't very fast, the overall tempo, it's 1, 2, 1, do 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 do, like that, right? But there's another tempo going around it, this the motion music, and so you don't have to play it very fast. You get lots and lots of energy, and you'll hear this in a second. Let's listen to the first subject. Here it is. Isn't that marvelous? And you can hear with perfect clarity that it has two tempo areas and two completely different kinds of music. There's the energy, motion, buzzy stuff, and then there's the actual tune, which only comes in, a little bit later. And that's your first subject. Now, the motion music returns, and after a little more buzzing and whirring and energy, it leads to the second subject. Now, the second subject is related to the first subject, which is really another stroke of genius on Brahms' part. Remember, the first subject had that rhythm underneath, bum, 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 like that. Well, the second subject is a melody, but the melody consists entirely of this rhythm. It's da-dum, ba-da, da-da, da-da, da-dum, da-dum, so that they're very, very tightly tied together. And it's a wonderful way to unify the movement and to use the material already before you get to whatever the textbooks would call the development section or anything like that. In real life, composers are always working with their material all the time. There will be a moment where there's a lot of changing from one key to another and more expressive range and transformation of themes and all that, but development starts at the beginning. It really does, when composers really know what they're doing with sonata form. So this second subject is based on the accompanying rhythm of the first subject. And here it is. Lovely lyrical music. And so if you keep in mind those three elements, the motion music, the first subject tune, more motion music, the second subject tune, that is the material for this entire movement. And you'll know everything you need to know about the finale. But here's the point. These ideas are actually also summaries conceptually and in terms of what you hear of the actual entire sextet. And how is that possible? Well, you may recall that the sextet begins, the very first movement, with tempoless motion. motion music, a squiggle in this case, like that. That's the opening. And then there's a tune. Well, so does the finale. Now, the kind of movement is different, but the concept, and this is what you need to keep in mind. This is the important thing. Musical ideas do not necessarily have to be tunes. They can be kinds of music. They can be archetypes. So for the first movement and the finale, both start what is effectively in the same way. That is with buzzing movement, themeless, just, form gestures, wave-like objects, buzzing, whirring, squiggling, whatever it's doing. They start the same way, then you have a tune. And that's all there is to it. And the second movement, the scherzo, begins with a theme that consists mostly of little squigglies. Right? I mean, one of you even mentioned that when I played it originally, when I made the video about the second movement. You said, oh, it's a squiggle too. Exactly right. It's a squiggle. So you've got squiggle one, squiggle two, and it's not a squiggle. It's a chugga buzzy worry. But whatever it is, it's the same concept, which is energy, motion, and then theme, sort of separate. So those are the first, second, and fourth movements. And I've put together a little compilation of the opening of each one so you can hear how each contains a similar concept to start off. And this is one of these things which even if you consciously say, oh, yeah, that sounds like that, you understand that they belong together. You hear instinctively, subconsciously, whatever it is, the fact that these pieces are based on a similar idea. And here it is, 1, then 2, then 3. I put little pauses between them so that you can hear that. So there you go. Very clear, right? Now, another way that Brahms unifies the entire sextet is by using thematic shapes. Now, do you remember the opening theme? Da, 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 whatever that thing is. It's like that, a rising, just think about it as a rising phrase. Do, 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 like that. It's almost like, it goes up, then it goes down, then it goes up, then it goes down. It has a real shape to it, very elegant shape, rising and falling. Well, every single main theme, except for the scherzo, which is based on squiggles, does something similar, where you have themes rather than melodic shapes or just musical objects, whether it's a squiggle or a buzzword thing. If it's a theme, the themes all start with a similar rising idea. And there you have the first subject of the first movement. You have the opening of the slow movement, which is a theme in variations. So it really jams home that rising phrase idea. And you have that theme of the finale. Do 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 do, right? So here they are. The first melody, the opening of the slow movement, and the first subject theme from the finale, one after the other. I've been curling this thing up in my hands as I'm talking, so it's changing shape as we go. But there, I hope, is very, very clear that what Brahms is working with is melodic shapes. They don't have to be the same tune. They don't at all. They just have to have the same overall sort of structure. And you hear that too. You notice that. If every theme from this sextet went down, you would know right away they all go down. Well, they all go up. And so that in itself is a unifying proposition. And so this finale, again, even if it's the least intellectually, complex movement in the sextet, still manages to tie together the common thread that unites all of these movements. And so now that we've heard these sort of unifying ideas, and you know what the finale does and what its thematic material is, there's nothing more than to play the whole thing all the way through, and for you to just listen to it and enjoy it. It is so, so beautiful. This is, such a glorious ending to one of the great chamber works that Brahms or anybody else ever wrote. So here, with the Stuttgart soloists on Naxos, is the complete finale to the Brahms Sextet in G major, Opus 36. Magnificent, isn't it? Wasn't that fun? And once I hope I've just pointed these things out. It's not just easy to listen to. It's a joy. It's a positive, total, effective, magnificently wonderful, satisfying, fulfilling experience. The whole sextet is that. And so, as I said, I hope you have an opportunity to go and listen to the whole work, to get to know it, to really get to know it, because there are other subtle things that, sort of bind it together, and you may hear them the more you get to know it. But whether you do or you don't, it doesn't really make any difference. It's just let internalize the music. Let it become, part of your life. And you'll be the better for it, I guarantee it. And I really hope that this sequence of 4 talks on this sextet has really helped you to think about listening generally. I've also done talks on critical listening, and there'll be more of those too, about different musical elements. There are so many avenues into what this music is, and there's so much that this music accomplishes. Music has so many means and ways of expressing itself and evoking feelings in all of us, and creating imagery, and it does all of these things, and all we need to do is give it the time and recognize things that relate to other things. It's really that simple. It tells us what it's about while we listen. You don't need a lot of advanced experience. And I really think in these talks, really the point was just giving you some pointers and then turning you loose and letting you listen, because you can do it. We can all do it. The music does it for us, really. And even someone like Brahms, who has a reputation for being, somewhat difficult because he was such a meticulous composer and such a formal genius. But that doesn't matter. The point of it all was to express feelings in us. And this sextet does it. I think it's an overwhelming piece of music, just a glorious work. And I hope you agree and have enjoyed getting to know it as much as I have enjoyed talking to you about it. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.